Now we have a third speaker on Asian hermeneutics by somebody who needs no much introduction. Is Professor Sugitharajah, Professor Emeritus in Biblical Hermeneutics at Birmingham University, the UK, and has taught and lectured in several countries. His many publications focus on the Bible in its modern context, be it regional, especially Asia, or political, namely post-colonial. His edited volume, Voices from the Margin, was a Catholic Book Award winner, and his most recent publication is entitled The Brahvid and His Bible, Bloomsbury. Time is yours.
Thank you. There's a novel by Ray Bradbury. One of the characters says in the novel, a good friend is the one who visits you when you are in prison, but better friend is the one who comes to listen to your talk in the middle of a sunny Saturday afternoon. Paul, thank you for asking me to do this, and in doing so, you have put your career in online. Let me start with two quotations. Both come from renowned scholars who are involved in search for historical Jesus. The first one comes from E.P. Sanders. He says his main task is a historian. And he said, my aim is to only be a historian and exegete. And in the same sentence, he goes on to say that he is not interested in drawing out any theological implications. So if you want to draw out theological implication, you do it, because I'm not a theologian. The second quote also comes from Crossan. He did a lot of work on search for historical Jesus. And he says he knows, he is aware that his search for historical Jesus is determined by theological questions, but I'm not interested in theological questions. And he says he's not even interested in reading any systematic theology at all. So this kind of a thing that there is this division of labor between historian and theologian, it's a kind of an artificial one. What Crossan and Sanders don't realize is the Jesus they were investigating is not historical Jesus. He was an interpreted Jesus, already interpreted. One Galilean, 27 Jesuses in the Bible. So it's a conflict made by the academics that we are searching for historical Jesus. What you find in the New Testament is not historical Jesus. It's a confessional Jesus, interpreted by 27 authors. The story in India is completely different, because Paul asked me to say something about the relationship between the exegete and the distance between the text and the reader. 18th century India was, in a way, a revolutionary period where the Bhakti poets belonging to the marginal communities had challenged the possession of knowledge by a few Brahmins. So this was, in a way, a revolutionary period, and we didn't go through the same history as the Western biblical scholars went through. The historical factors which prevail in the West, pietism and rationalism, which paved way for historical criticism, have no parallel history in India. While academic debates were going on in the West, where Bible was seen as a mere document, Bible in India at the time was seen as a church's book. At a time when the historical criticism was busily engaged in dissecting the Bible, British and Foreign Bible Society was instrumental in spearheading the scriptural imperialism in India and Asia, was engaged in applying the Bible to the stress and strains of life of Indian people. The scientific inquiry which demolished some of the biblical stories did not happen in India at all, because science and Vedic tradition went hand in hand. So science and religion did not have any conflict in India at all. And also the whole, while the biblical scholars in the West saw Bible as a site of intersectarian and doctrinal struggles, Indian Christians saw the Bible as a product of pluralistic context, and they were trying to see the parallels between Indian history and the biblical history. They employed frames of reference which did not depend on biblical or Mediterranean sources. The pioneer in this field was K.M. Banerjee. What he did was, he was seeing parallels between the biblical stories of the creation, fall, and flood, and with the Vedic text. He viewed the Semitic text and the Eastern text as one common human heritage. And Armu, a noveler from Sri Lanka, he saw the Bible as a manual for rituals, and he highlighted that the similarities between the Saivite ritual practices and the Jewish ritual practices recorded in the Hebrew scriptures. And he came to the conclusion it was the Saivites who performed the rituals better than the Jews themselves. And, this is and the second, this is Keshav Chandra Sen. He saw the Bible containing cultural expressions like songs and dance. Again, while British and Foreign Bible Society was treating Bible predominantly as a missionary book, Keshav Chandra Sen, he was trying to Banerjee was using the Vedic and biblical text to reconnect with his own people. So this is very important. Whereas the Bible was seen as to use, to wean the Bible from their communities, some of the Indian Christians were using the Vedic text to reconnect with their own community. One was K.M. Banerjee. What is striking about this comparative exegesis was that while the Western scholars were dealing with the dead gods of Rome and Greece, Indians were dealing with the living gods and goddesses of India. Historical critical method and myths, historical critical methods of myths and concerns. The division of labor between exegetes and the expositor is largely a creation of the West. We were simply dragged into it. We have no part in this history, but we were dragged into it because in order to satisfy the masters, we used some Oriental charms with the text and came up with some exegesis. Africans used the witchcraft on the text and came with some exegesis. This is purely a Western construct. We have nothing to do with this. Method has to do with German historical biblical scholarship, try to gain a place in the Western, in the German universities and be part of the cultural and intellectual development of the time. Spurred on by the German Enlightenment, the biblical scholars at the time were encouraged to use Bible for historical sources, both ancient and academic. The result was Bible became a kind of a specialized and heavily biased towards text and heavily oriented towards Semitic philology. So I think the result was the Bible became a professional or expert's book. If you listen to our first day presentation, all this narrative criticism and the rest of the other criticism all made Bible an expert's book. Bible should belong to people, not to the experts. There are 4 myths about these compartmentalization. When there is this division, it's not total Western. It's not part of the total Western hermeneutics. In England, in Germany, while this division was going on, in England, the Cambridge trio, Westcott, Lightfoot, and Holt, they were trying to relate the Bible to the people. The famous phrase was faith to faith. And English Lives of Jesus produced this time was again relating the Bible and Jesus to the people rather than taking Bible and Jesus away from the people. The second myth is that the modern scientific objective reading has been existence for time immemorial. No, it is not. It is only more than 150 years old. And the third myth is that academic biblical exegesis, they say it is objective, but it is not objective. It is partial. It is biased. Academic, it may be, but it's tied up with the dominant politics of the time. Now, for example, look at this book, First World War. How this book contains essays by both German biblical scholars and also British biblical scholars, how they sided with their own countries and read into the Bible and brought out exegesis, support their war efforts. Some of the British biblical scholars were part of the British Army. So don't believe when they say they are objective. Everybody is subjective. The important thing is we must be aware of our subjectivity in reading the Bible. And then the historical critical method has some weaknesses. It privileges textual tradition at the expense of the oral tradition of the people. The folk stories of the people often exhibit anti-establishment elements. Unlike the text, they are not frozen. They flow with the time. They come out with new revelations. But the historical critical tradition is so obsessed with the text, it doesn't give a chance for the oral tradition to exist. And also the method has assumed some umpiring role. It has become a judge because we are all judged by this method. In the recent, the recent book on reception history, the editor in the introduction says, our exegeses are not scholarly enough because we are not using historical critical method. And in the same volume, the two people, Emma England and John Lyons says, we are dilettante wanderers because we wander from one context to one hermeneutical interest to the other. And then the historical critical method thinks in terms of a linear history and follows a triumphal line which goes against the interest of the colonized, who appears to be lagging behind the imagined progress. So historical critical criticism makes us believe that our histories are partial and degraded and needed fulfillment with the help of Christianity and Western civilization. The other problem with the historical critical method is that it is not only Eurocentric, it always do what we call the racial profiling of the other. There are many examples I'll give you. I'll go back to. If you read parables of Jesus, Jeremiah, as you know, if you went to a proper theological college, you would have, of course, come across Jeremiah's work. When he exegeting the parable of the laborers, the vineyard, he says, the steward goes frequently to recruit people. And because they were laborers, they were idling. Because they don't want, it's not because they didn't have any work, because they are idle. And Jeremiah's comment was, the Eastern laborers are lazy. Where did he get this impression that Oriental people are lazy? It is not in the text. is racial profiling. And the same parable, exegeted by Margaret Mead, not the anthropologist Margaret Mead, Margaret Mead in Cambridge University, wrote an article in Expository Times on the same parable. And she says, why the steward paid everyone the same amount? Because in the East, they have no history of accounting. Arithmetic started in India. So this is, I'm given only a few examples, but if you read my introduction to the second volume of the Voices from the Margin, I have given all kinds of examples from different exegeses. So now, historical critical criticism and the Asian responses. One of the Indian biblical scholars who took historical criticism very seriously was the Roman Catholic George Soros Prabhu. He found that method unidimensional and deliberately stripping the text of its emotional value and lamented that the method has created an academic isolation which is compounded with the cultural alienation as well. So this does not mean that we Asians are not critical, we can't think critically, we can think critically. If you read Argumentative Indian, Amitya Sen gives examples after example, how we think critically, and provides, as I said, examples. Buddha did not go to Harvard to criticize Hinduism, because in the Buddhist tradition itself has a number of critical methods. Historical critical method is a solution to a problem which Asians never had, but it's until they were introduced to us. Western biblical scholars end up investigating, inventing problems, and then try to fix them while pretending that they are all relevant. Now, markers of Asian reading. Bible reading in India is not an exercise in isolation. Bible is not a standalone book. You have to read in relation to other texts. You have to read in relation to Gita. You have to read in relation to Dhammapada. You have to read in relation to Mahabharata and Ramayana. You can't simply read it. It doesn't exist on its own. You have to read with something else, either Indian religious text or Indian social political concerns. There are two characteristics of Indian Asian reading. One is the reading which takes the Indian religious context seriously, which you have all known. So, people like Amardas, he said, my first thing is to assimilate my own culture and religious past by reading the Indian scriptures, and then I will reread the gospel in the light of the thing. So I think that is the important thing. But that was in the first phase. And the second phase, what we have done is, because of the emergence of the Dalits and the marginalized concern, and Indians have developed what we call the sociological reading. These are the people who have used religious traditions to read the text. And of course, in Taiwan, we have people like C.S. Song. And this book, in a way, combines both religious and social reading of Indians. So this is an important volume. And then Leave the Temple is, again, taking the liberation theology seriously, because we found liberation theology excessively biblical, overtly Christocentric, and it was done from a monocultural context. And some of the findings were not useful for us. So the Leave the Temple is an example of that. This is the Sugitharajah Prabhu. I think I'm going to move on and say, come to, because if I don't say about empire, I will. I have a section on historical Jesus, but that we can do it. I think the Bible, biblical, the critical moments in historical studies happened at the height of the empire. Search for historical Jesus started when the Western empires were going and finding out new countries. So the historical Jesus has a parallel in the empire interest. And also interestingly, the Jesus seminar in America was at its height when the America was seen as the empire. And then gospel harmonies were produced in the 1980s and 19th century when Portugal and Spain were the leading empires. Because while the Portuguese and Spain conquerors were trying to sort out the uncivilized people, the ecclesiastical leaders here trying to bring shape to the gospel tradition. That's why they produce this gospel harmony. So I'll finish with two concerns. One is that I'll say only one concern, but there's so many other things. Up until now, Asian biblical hermeneutics have simply trying to translate the Semitic images into Asian context. I think we can't allow, or it's not hermeneutically possible to allow one region to set the standard for other regions. There are other revelations. So we must reverse the hermeneutical order, not translating from Semitic images to Asian images. We must start with the Asian liberative tradition, and on the basis of that, we must work out our hermeneutics. That's what Keshav Chandra said in a very scholarful way. Why should I go through Jerusalem when I can go through Banaras? Thank you very much.